Hello and welcome back to Miami Concours. In this video, I will be showing you guys around the entire show and all of the hijinks that ensued. I hope you enjoy. Now, since Lamborghinis are best for views on YouTube, I'm going to start there with this Centenario and Countach that both featured in the last video. What I didn't show in the last video was the white interior this Countach has. I love it when people spec these new Countaches in a way that pays homage to the original car. It's so cool to see cars like these. Speaking of original Countaches, here's the car that I claimed was in blue Acapulco, which some of you found hilarious.
A Lamborghini Countach in blue Acapulco with a white interior is the best spec of any Countach I've ever seen.
The car is actually finished in blue Tahiti. There's a small error I made in the last video, but this color is still gorgeous. Next up, we have the Lamborghini Concept S, the one-of-one concept car based on the Gallardo, except it is a speedster version of the car. I touched on this car in the last video, but one thing that I found interesting about this car at Concours is that a lot of people were walking by it. A lot of the TikTok Zoomers that are all over the internet nowadays were just walking by it. They thought it was just a Gallardo with a weird kit. Also, look at those dials. That's just so cool. I love little dial arrangements like that. But yeah, it was really odd to see people walking by this car thinking it was just a regular Gallardo, which you and I know that that is not the case, and it was just so cool to see this car at Concours. Now we have the Diablo GT that was making a lot of noise in the last video. This car is owned by popular Instagram collector Petfred. He took his GT, one of 50, and then put some parts from the GTR on the car, so it's a bit of a resto mod, which is really cool. He also owns this, the Murcielago SV. I mentioned this in my first ever vlog that this is my favorite Lamborghini of all time. It is one of my all-time dream cars. The SV is just the ultimate of V12 Lamborghinis in my heart and mind. It's so cool to see this car. It really never gets old, and in matte black, it is so cool. It is a properly good spec. Here we have some cars from Prestige. We have the two Ultimate Roadsters. We have the Ultimate Coupe and the Verde Gia, which is the launch color of the Sion, on the Lamborghini Huracan STO. This car is owned by Brett David, the owner of Prestige Imports, so that's really cool that he brought some of his cars out. He also brought one of his Huayras out, which is just so cool to see. Here is a car that needs no introduction, the Lamborghini Diablo GT2. Now, I went a little bit more in depth about this car in my last video, but this is a one-of-one factory race car prototype from Lamborghini. It has been in their museum since the 90s up until just a couple of months ago. It is so cool to see this car. It literally is one of a kind. Here's something interesting. This is the Zinger 21C. I sounded a little bit like Doug DeMuro there, but this is a new American hypercar. Check out that seating arrangement. One seat behind the other. This car is made using AI design, so the entire chassis is designed by AI, which is really cool. Whether that's scary to you or not, that remains to be seen. But do let me know in the comments, would you drive a car that's been designed by AI? I would love to know. Hypercars are cool and all, but I'll always have a huge affinity for classic Ferraris like these, just like this Dino 246 GTS and the two Daytonas, the first of which being in Rosso Corsa, the classic Ferrari red, and the second of which being in Azzurro Dino with a dark blue interior, and ending it off with the 365 GTC4 in green. Here's a car I've never seen before. This is a 1947 Delahaye 135 MS. 135, signifying how much horsepower it has, doesn't sound like much, but remember, it is 1947. Cars didn't have any power in 1947. This is a gorgeous design. I don't know much about these cars, admittedly, but what I can tell you is that this one is worth somewhere in the mid $2 million range, which is just insane. Here we see the judging panel hard at work grading this 1955 Corvette. Corvettes will always have a special place in my heart because I've basically been a Chevy kid since birth, so it is so cool to see these cars at big Concours events like these. Here we have a small lineup of incredible retro supercars, starting with this Bugatti EB110 SS prototype, which actually has the engine from the car that set the production car speed record back in the early 90s. I featured this car in the last video, so if you want to see it driving and moving, go over there. Next up, we have this Ferrari F40, which is a US spec car, which is inferior to the Euro spec cars because of the reflector light and the plastic splitter. So I'm going to just skip this car, even though it is incredibly cool. And then there's this, the BMW M1, which as we all know is the best M car ever made. No questions asked. If that hurts your feelings, I'm not sorry. Here's a car that you never really see out in the open much. This is a Jaguar XJR 15, or should I say Jaguar Sport XJR 15, because these cars were not made by Jaguar. They were made by Jaguar Sport. which was responsible for a lot of Jaguar's racing back in the late 80s and early 90s, such as their Group C cars like the XJR9. These cars are also very rare. They only made a total of 53 units. This particular one is chassis number 5. This is owned by Instagram car collector Dennis Akoya King. It is really cool that he often drives this car. It's not a car that is locked away like a lot of the XJR15s. It is a car that is very regularly driven, and as such, it is so cool to see this car at Concours. For this next car, I would like to preface that it is my favorite car ever made, but I will give you a completely unbiased report about it. This is a Ferrari F50, which is undoubtedly the best supercar of all time. Get your McLaren F1 and get your Bugatti Veyron out of here. This is better, because this has a Formula One derived V12 and a manual transmission and an open top. It is a perfect culmination of everything great about supercars. Not only that, but this F50 is the very first production F50. Yes, this is chassis number 1001, as it says on the license plate. This car is also owned by Dennis, who brought the XJR15. I was hoping I would see this car when I came to Miami, and I'm so glad I did. This is truly a bucket list car to see. It is so cool. I'm really interested by the yellow pinstriping. I never seen an F50 like that before. I kind of dig it, I kind of don't. Here we have a Roof CTR anniversary, which was built to commemorate the original Roof CTR Yellowbird, which set the most incredible Nürburgring lap record of all time. If you haven't seen that video of the car just sliding everywhere, please, for the love of God, go watch it. Continuing with the roof theme, here is a CTR in Irish green metallic, which is a gorgeous color. Even more gorgeous, though, is the interior. Oh, you can kind of see your boy there. But there is a houndstooth with the green. It is so nice. I don't know much more about this car, admittedly, but it is so cool and it is in such a nice color. At Concours, this car won the award for Best Supercar. It might not look it, but when I tell you about this car, maybe you'll understand why. This is a 1986 Mercedes 300E, but it is a 6-liter AMG car. This is when AMG was its own independent company, when you had to send your boring old Mercedes sedan, and for 40 grand, they would build it into a fire-breathing 200-mile-an-hour monster. This car is insanely rare, insanely cool. Less than 20 of these things were produced, so it is an absolute unicorn. Here we enter a line of Aston Martins, including this V8 Vantage Volante and this DB4 that featured in the last video. 2 more V8 Vantages, this time in coupe form, as well as this Aston Martin DB5 Volante. Here we have the winner of the Touring Classic Concours. This is an Alfa Romeo 155 TR from the year 1993. In a very iconic Alfa Romeo livery, admittedly on a very iconic Alfa Romeo race car. So cool to see this. Now comes the row of Paganis. Now, I'm not going to go in detail on any of these cars, considering I went in great depth of each and every single one of them in the last video, so go do check it out. But I'm going to go through a quick rundown of what's here. We have the 5 base Huayra coupes from Prestige, the gorgeous Verde McLaren BC from Curated, 3 Huayra Roadsters from Prestige, and rounding it off with 2 Huayra Roadster BCs, also from Prestige. Moving on to the rally section, we start off with this incredible Ford RS200. As you can see, the owner is standing there next to his car with his RS200 t-shirt on. Clearly, he is very proud of it. I'm sure this will present no issues as the show continues.
You will always be a monster.
Anyways, moving on, we have this Toyota Corolla WRC driven by Luis Moya and Carlos Sainz Sr., which is really cool, in the iconic Toyota Castrol livery. We also have a 2004 Subaru WRX STI, which took place in the 2004 Rallier Monte Carlo. There was also a 22B STI, which is one of the coolest homologation rally cars of all time, in my personal opinion. I've never seen one of these before, but it was really cool to check it off my bucket list. Once again, we run into the judging panel as they survey this incredibly rad Peugeot 205 T16. Another thing I never noticed about the T16 is that the engine is very far to the right. So not only is it a mid-engine car, but it is also a side-engine car. Because it is. Here's something completely different. This is the Red Bull RB19, this year's F1 car, which is proving to be absolutely dominant on every track, in every condition. But admittedly, this is the show car, not the actual race car that Max Verstappen or Sergio Perez drives. But still, this is extremely cool to see. Going back to hypercars, here is another white Lamborghini Countach, this time with white wheels, so it's immediately cooler than the one that was featured before. Here is a full carbon McLaren Speedtail, which briefly featured in the last video. On top of that, Prestige brought the yellow McLaren Senna and the blue on blue on blue Bugatti Divo, which is so cool. I loved seeing this thing drive in the last video. On top of that, we have a Lamborghini Aventador SVJ 63, as well as a Porsche 918 Spyder, which also featured in the last video, as well as a GT Black Series Project 1 Edition. I keep mentioning the last video, which you should go watch, but this Enzo was in it, which was really cool. But this car was easily the highlight of my trip, the Koenigsegg CCX R Edition. This was my favorite car to drive on Forza Horizon 1, so there is so much nostalgia around this car. But to tell you why this car is so great, I'm going to hand it over to my boy Tyrese.
There's only 4 of those cars in the whole world. I got the only one in the Western Hemisphere.
Thank you, Tyrese. And yes, that is the correct number. He was referring to the CCX R Edition, as there are only 4 of those in the entire world. Here's another childhood hero, the Bugatti Veyron Supersport. You might think this is a world record edition. It actually isn't. It was spec'd to be almost identical apart from the orange interior. Fun fact, Ed Bullion tried to buy this car sometime last year, but it didn't end up working out. But it was so cool to see this car. This is actually my first time ever seeing a Supersport. I've seen a Vitesse in the past, but never one of these. Coming on some pretty cool Porsches now, including this 993 Gunther Works. Never seen a Gunther Works before, but look at this interior. Red carbon bucket seats. I've never seen a Porsche like this before. Very neat spec. Very neat car. We also have a classic Porsche Carrera GT and GT Silver, a 993 Carrera RS, and a 964 Carrera RS, and I don't know what color of blue, but it looked really cool. We also have this, the Rimac Nevera, the Croatian electric hypercar that has very much taken the world by storm. But on top of that, Rimac themselves are taking the world by storm. I mean, they bought out Bugatti. They're working with Porsche and Koenigsegg and Aston Martin and all these other brands in developing EV technology. It's a very cool car, and I can't even begin to imagine what this thing is like to drive. Here's a lineup of some very nicely spec'd Ferraris, including this blue Ferrari 430 Scuderia, the 575 Super America, which is the ultra-limited convertible version of the 575. Unfortunately, this one does have the F1 gearbox, but one cool thing that this car has is an IMSA plate. I didn't know that Florida had an IMSA plate, which is really cool. There is also an 812 Competizione in blue Tour de France with a yellow stripe. This is Ferrari's new ultra-limited edition version of the 812 Superfast, limited to only 999 units to Ferrari's top VIP customers. The V12 in this car revs up to 9,500 RPM, and I would love to hear one of these engines up there. Now ending out the line, we have a 430 Scuderia 16M, which I featured in the last video, as well as this Ferrari 296 GTB. Here's another lineup of Porsches, but some of these are in absolutely incredible specs, including this 997 GT3 in Signal Orange, this 964 Turbo in Summer Yellow, which is absolutely gorgeous, but even more gorgeous is this 964 RS America Cabriolet in Mint. That is the name of the color. But also there's this 964 Carrera RS and this 993 RSR, which actually won Best Porsche in the entire Concours. There was also this RWB 964. RWBs are always awesome. I've always thought they were really cool, especially the 964 ones. That's my favorite body style of 911, and it's my favorite body style of RWB as well. So very cool car. Here's a very weird and interesting car. This is the Ital-Design Aztec, designed by famous designer Giorgetto Giugiaro. This was built to commemorate the 20th anniversary of Ital-Design. And one thing that I find really interesting is that the driver and the passenger are separated. They have to communicate through radio within the car, which I find really interesting. And there are steering wheels on both sides, which is very weird. It has an Audi Inline 5 and a Lancia four-wheel drive system. There are so many quirks with this car that I don't have time to get into during this video. If there's one car that you should look up after watching this video, for God's sake, look this car up. It is so cool. Also, surprise 935 moment. Don't know if it's real, but damn does it sound cool. There was also a big parking lot at Concours full of a bunch of cars, so I'm only going to rattle off some of the highlights, including this Roof Turbo R, which was really cool. This Gallardo Performante, which is actually a manual car, one of only 3 in existence with the manual transmission. This is high up on my list of dream Lamborghinis. It is so cool to see this car with a very rare option being the manual transmission. Some Lamborghini Huracan Super Trofeo cars, including 2 of the new Evo 2 kits, which were really cool to see. It's a very aggressive look for the Huracan. I'm wondering if the Huracan replacement takes a bunch of design cues from these race cars. Be really cool if it did, as well as this amazingly spec'd STO, gray with blue accents. Very, very, very nice spec. There was also this Sherp, which is too big to fit on your screen. I apologize, but in all fairness, it is quite big. The new AlphaTauri AT03 F1 car. Now, just like the Red Bull we saw earlier, this car is also a show car. You can easily tell that because of the driver names. On one hand, it's Yuki Tsunoda. On the other hand, it's Nick DeVries. Obviously, the real race car wouldn't say anything like that. On top of that, you can also see a lack of suspension and braking components. It's a very bare shell, but it is still really cool to see the livery in person, especially given that this was only a few weeks after the livery was unveiled up in New York. Speaking of Red Bull, we also had half of a Red Bull F1 car. Now, this was actually like a pit stop challenge where you could challenge your friends to see how fast you could replace a wheel. I didn't myself try this because I didn't have any friends around, but it was really cool to see other people try it. Here is a Venturi Atlantique. It is a French supercar. It is commonly referred to as the French Ferrari F40, and you can kind of see why. There are a lot of styling cues that are derived from the F40 on this car, and it looks rather good. It doesn't look like a cheap knockoff. And on top of that, this car actually raced at Le Mans, so it is a real race car with real pedigree, and it just looks extremely cool. This SLS just came back from Los Santos Customs. This might look like a regular old Charger, but actually this car is very fast and even more furious. Quite literally, because this car was screen used in F9 driven by Vin Diesel. It is a 1,650 horsepower Mercury Marine engine, a full carbon fiber body. This car is called the Tantrum. It is an insanely cool car. It was brought by Prestige. It was one of my favorite cars at Concours because I'm a huge sucker for insane muscle car resto mods. Take a look at this E36 M3. It is a one of one in this mint green color. I don't remember what the color is called off the top of my head, but it is a Euro spec, has a bunch of really cool options. It even has the color match stitching in the interior. It is such a nice spec. I have a huge love for E36s. It was one of the original cars that got me into cars in the first place. It's just so cool to see a really, really nice one like this. And then there's this Diablo VT 6-liter. Very cool car. Now, there's a sticker on it that says Elite Blockchain Cybersecurity, but I'm going to ignore that because there's a manual transmission right there, and that's infinitely cooler. And on top of that, it has the infamous 300ZX headlights. Overall, it's a very cool car. It was the end of the day, and awards are being given out. This particular award was for Best Luxury, and the winner was this gorgeous 1954 Packard. Now, you might be asking yourself, Patrick, now what was the best in show? Okay, you're probably not asking that, but I'm going to answer it anyways, because it was this, the Ferrari 250 GT California. I am truly saving the best for last here. Although this car might not be a short wheelbase like the one in Ferris Bueller, it is still an absolutely gorgeous car. Dark blue paintwork, red interior. Talk to the owner, and he just restored this car. He's been restoring this thing for the last 12 years, and you can tell it is absolutely perfect. What a car to end the day here in Miami.
Bitch.
Miami trip was definitely one of the best experiences in my entire life. Not just in the cars, in the people too. And there are some special people that I would like to shout out. The first of which being my good friend Sebastian. He let me tag along with him on a lot of his work-related adventures. It was just a fun time, and he did everything in his power to make sure that I had a great time down in Florida. I would also like to extend that to the entire team at Prestige, Brett, Daniel, in fact, everybody. They're the GOATs. If you are by chance in the market for a supercar, hypercar, muscle car, luxury car, and Prestige has the car for you, please go to them. They are all amazing. I cannot recommend them enough. Anyways, I'm Patrick, the King of Cars, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care.